If you paid attention to the Summer Games Fest showcases this year, one thing became painfully clear. The video game industry is retreating to safe bets for easy cash. We're actively drowning in a sea of nostalgia, with remakes, remasters, retro re releases, all becoming a massive part of the modern gaming cycle. From announced titles like Persona 4 Revival, the recently released Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, or even Halo Campaign Evolved, the market is being flooded by the ghosts of its past. And this isn't just about preservation anymore. Where before it was about making old games accessible and not doomed to the realm of ROMs and piracy, publishers aren't just remastering old games anymore. They're actively skinwalking them. Welcome to the Remake Epidemic. If you're wondering how we got here, we need to put ourselves back in 2019 and 2020, with what broke the mold of the stagnating gaming industry. Final Fantasy VII Remake. A multi-disc 90s classic on the PS1 finally ushered in for a new audience. Whereas before Square had suffered due to the failures of Final Fantasy XIII, the developmental hell and shortcoming of Nomura's Final Fantasy XV, and the previous controversy of remakes in Final Fantasy X, Square Enix pulled off the impossible by making the word remake an active verb in the story of the game. Instead of being a graphical and mechanical jump, the entire story is lifted from the original. It is the exception to the rule because it justifies its own existence the moment that the Whispers are introduced. It doesn't overwrite the classic PS1 game, but instead acts as a meta-narrative sequel where the characters possess knowledge from their original timeline. The Whispers represent fans, purists, demanding a one-to-one recreation, wanting to strip away the new ARPG battle system as well as character development. Only when the Whisper King is defeated in the place of Shinra does the timeline change, time traveling, allowing the next two games, Rebirth and Revelation, to forge a completely new narrative path. It was no wonder that this game popped off, showing up at the Game Awards as a nominee for Game of the Year. Featuring fan favorites in high fidelity with fan service and the sake of Cloud's cross-dressing or Tifa's illustrious dresses. Whether it justified a trilogy is another story, one that many fans decry due to the unseriousness of the remake, making it more style over substance. Alone, though, Remake is undoubtedly a stellar piece of media, and deservedly so, but also the Firestarter in our current decline. The other heavy hitter of pre-pandemic gaming was Resident Evil 2 Remake. Coming off the spiritual rebirth of Resident Evil 7, Capcom proved they could bring quality games back as full-fledged remakes. Similar to Square Enix, they were also suffering from a lack of success, compared to their original games in their series. Resident Evil 6, Revelations, the movies, and the crippling, convoluted story of Resident Evil. Ethan Winter's story in 7 is the true rebirth, a reboot if anything, and how Resident Evil 2 Remake was able to take off. Bringing Leon back into glorious 3D at 1080p fidelity and dropping the fixed camera angles showed the industry you could successfully rebuild a classic with modern development paradigms. Instantly, the remake wiped away the bitter taste of the PS3 era Resident Evil, bringing itself to GOTY nominations in 2019. Again, though, it only proved that nostalgia prints money, and Capcom, as well as the rest of the industry, took the wrong lessons from their success. It didn't take that long for Capcom to prove that point. Where Resident Evil 2 was a stunning, meticulously crafted modernization, its immediate successor felt like a hollow cash grab. Resident Evil 3 Remake took Jill Valentine and the iconic, terrifying Nemesis and completely gutted them. Capcom cut massive, beloved sections of the game like the Clock Tower, and nerfed Nemesis from a dynamic stalker into a series of rigid, heavily scripted set pieces. They traded mechanical depth for cinematic flair and a quick turnaround time. It says as much that it was released within a year of Resident Evil 2 Remake as a near asset flip, which normally isn't a problem. Look at Fallout New Vegas or Persona 4. But it was a problem because it was a remake in the first place. Not a sequel or a new iteration, a remake. Then came the Resident Evil 4 Remake. While mechanically competent and better than the original in many aspects, it arguably generated a new wave of fans. Ones who hadn't been around since the PlayStation days, draining some of that artistic, original soul. So much can be seen with the new voice acting in the remake, draining Ada Wong and Sadler of their rich charisma and replacing it with almost cheesy quips. Capcom sanded off the campy B-movie soul in favor of portraying Leon's story in preparation for Resident Evil Requiem. My biggest complaint for this remake, though, is that only 2 years prior to the game's release, Resident Evil 8 released. It was oriented as a Resident Evil 4 spiritual successor, similar to how 7 was a reboot of the franchise. In the end, though, Capcom shifted from preserving their history to simply replacing it with a more digestible and modern skin, as we are soon going to see with the Code Veronica remake potentially usurping Resident Evil 5 from obtaining a remake. But Capcom isn't the only publisher guilty of trading a game's soul for a polished aesthetic. This brings us to the dangerous trend of the Palatable Remake, a transition from a fading, uncompromising RPG era into slick corporate modernity. Enter Persona 3 Reload. Taking the hyper-stylized momentum of Persona 5, Atlas turned their darkest, most abrasive classic into the oldest of the newest games. In isolation, Reload is gorgeous. The all-out attacks are slick, the theurgies are flashy, and the new Tartarus decorations are visually stunning amidst its monotony. But in stripping away the friction of the original game, they completely castrated the thematic weight. The original Persona 3 was intentionally designed to feel bleak, harsh, and isolating to mirror its heavy themes of depression and mortality. Pushing the lighting engine in the Iwatodai dorms to look warm and cozy does the exact inverse of the narrative intent. It makes the character's world feel soft and plush, entirely undermining the tragedy awaiting at the end of the year. By making the protagonist a lot more outspoken and seen in the game's interactions, it abstracts him from that emo, loner aesthetic that he's supposed to harness in the early 2000s. And this is beside removing the exhaustion mechanic, which forced players to pace themselves in the Tartarus dungeon rather than blitz through it like the palaces of Persona 5. Worse yet is the sanitization of the cast. Reload actively flanderized the characters to make them more likable to a modern audience. They watered down Yukari's feisty, defensive, and occasionally mean character traits, erasing the reality that she's a deeply traumatized, moody teenager who lost her dad and her mom's a deadbeat. They also toned down Junpei Iori's early game narcissism, which completely flattens his brilliant character evolution later in the story with Chidori. Even in the musical notes are the indie isolation edges removed, a grunge garage band style overwritten with Reload's overproduced, high-end pop/jazz slop, indicative of Persona 5. The replacement of the original raw, hand-drawn 2D anime cutscenes with sterile 3D animations completely robbed the weight from Shinji and Ken's pivotal scenes. And when you finally reach the DLC epilogue, the message is crystal clear. Originally, the answer was a brutal, grueling grindfest that perfectly married punishing gameplay with a theme of inescapable, suffocating grief. Reload softens this grind entirely. It didn't want you to feel the game's original suffering. It wanted to trap you in a highly marketable, perfectly safe loop of pure aesthetic. A vibe. This is aside from the fact that this was the first Persona game to charge $70 for a full title, alongside dribbles of DLC and an entire expansion pass just to play the answer. Another whopping $30. But even if a remake doesn't flanderize its characters or gut its mechanical depth, it can still destroy the original experience by fundamentally misunderstanding the cost of graphical rehauls. Take From Software's legacy, for example. Miyazaki's first baby, Demon's Souls, was completely drowned on the PS5 by Bluepoint Games. The original possessed a grim, oppressive, gothic medieval art direction that was intentionally staggering. Bluepoint took that unique, decaying aesthetic and structured it into a generic high fantasy showcase for modern hardware. It looks technically stunning, but it isn't the soul of Demon's Souls. A similar fate befell the Dark Souls remaster release, which notoriously broke the original lighting engine and the textures of the armor, replacing gritty realism with a flat and plasticky sheen. But nowhere is the cost of the fidelity more painfully obvious with the beloved Halo franchise. When Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition dropped in the Master Chief Collection, the graphical updates completely ruined the shadow-drenched atmosphere of the flood levels, overlighting the environment and making everything look plasticky. Imagine a remake of Half-Life 2 where all the assets are replaced with Play-Doh Roblox models. That is exactly what this marketed upgrade felt like. And the franchise is doubling down on this trend. At the recent Summer Games Fest, Xbox revealed Halo Campaign Evolved, a ground-up remake, again, built in UE5 that is set to launch later this month. Instead of simply preserving the 2001 classic, they are altering the package by injecting a brand new prequel, Operation Meteorite, a measly 3 missions. When you see a publisher charging $50 for the base game and up to $200 for a collector's edition of a title that has already been remastered and re-released multiple times, the illusion of preservation shatters. It no longer feels like a celebration of an industry-defining classic. It feels like a hollow cash grab designed to squeeze a beloved IP for every last drop of marketable nostalgia. This brings us to the absolute darkest depths of the remake epidemic. Well, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but still, this remake felt like a complete bastardization of an experience that I loved as a kid. Silent Hill 2 Remake. Konami handing the keys of their psychological horror masterpiece in Silent Hill 2 to Bloober Team was a red flag from day one. This is a studio synonymous with skinwalking other, better horror games. I mean, look at how much Layers of Fear feels entirely plagiarized from PT and the broader horror zeitgeist. But what they did to Silent Hill 2 is a masterclass in how to fundamentally misunderstand your source material. To give credit where it's due, the music is still fantastic. That is solely because they brought back the legendary Akira Yamaoka. Everything else feels like a complete hollow shell. Let's start with the gameplay. The original Silent Hill 2 was about isolation, dread, and a deeply suffocating atmosphere. Bloober Team looked at that and decided what it really needed was 10 to 20 hours of mindless, Last of Us style combat slop. Over the shoulder, guns, parry slop. By injecting a hyper-modern combat loop into a psychological horror game, they completely stripped James Sunderland of his vulnerability. Where before you struggled as James to run away from the Pyramid Head with a fixed camera or tank controls, now you were able to outmaneuver Pyramid Head or the other bad guys with the adeptness of an average gamer. Then they started sanitizing the art. They neutered and censored some of the most impactful and disturbing boss fights. They also altered character visages in a way that sparked massive controversy, abandoning the unsettling, uncanny valley era of the PS2 for modernized character models. And this is besides the controversy that came with the changes to Angela or Maria. I'm coming in while editing and realizing that I left a comment about a year ago on a Silent Hill 2 remake video talking about how the prison cell scene in particular is the most telling difference between the remake and the original. If you can see here, Maria is sat in an awkward, shadowy position in the original. Both of the characters converse with the camera panning back and forth, with "I'm not your Mary" emphasized with a zoom in on Maria. If you contrast that with the remake, Mary is instead sat in a more relaxed and seductive fashion. Sure, it fits her character, but instead she plays more posh and coy than she actually does being Mary. When she goes to stand up and confront James and puts her hand on his cheek, you can see the shadows taking away from the background. There's no focus of the camera to tell you what to look at. Her hand rests on James' cheek. If you take this in comparison to the remake, instead we have the camera focusing on Mary, or Maria, here in this scene. Then it refocuses onto her hand as she places it on James' cheek, telling the viewer, the player, what to look at, what to focus on. In art, shadowing and texture is everything. This is even more telling with the audio here in the original version.
It doesn't matter who I am. I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real.
As you can see, there is no music, there's no swoosh, it's just Maria's cold voice.
I am here for you, James. See? I'm real.
In the remake version, we get ominous music, a punctual swoosh to tell the viewer to react to the scene. There's no nuance, there's no coldness. It's all heavy handed and ham fisted with the direction. But the most damning indictment of Bloober Team's fundamental misunderstanding of the game is the fog. In 2001, the iconic Silent Hill fog was a genius artistic solution to a hardware limitation. It hit the PS2's low draw distance while simultaneously creating the most oppressive atmosphere in gaming history. In the remake, Bloober Team decided to fully render the entire town at all times underneath the fog. This tanked the game's performance, causing massive optimization issues, all to render geometry you aren't supposed to see. Whether you want to say it's inexperience or laziness, they prioritize technical quote unquote fidelity over the artistic intent that made the fog legendary in the first place. A genius idea taken over by people who didn't know why it was there in the first place. Even the original Japanese developers knew this was a risk. Masahiro Ito and others expressed that the original game was good enough and didn't need a remake. They reportedly only hopped onto the project to supervise the Western developers to make sure they didn't completely butcher the legacy. And it's no coincidence that Silent Hill 2 was the target. Note how Konami didn't greenlight a remake of the original Silent Hill 3 or 4. They went straight for the most marketable, most widely LARPed classic on the internet. They didn't want to preserve Silent Hill 2, they wanted to wear its skin. So why does the industry keep skinwalking its past? Why do we keep getting force-fed these hollow and corporate copies instead of original ideas? The answer, as always, is the bottom line. When you look at the raw market data, the math is horrifyingly simple for these publishers. Between 2024 and 2025, remakes and remasters accumulated 72.4 million players across consoles and Steam. These players generated approximately $1.4 billion in full game purchases and microtransactions. According to industry analytics, an average remake generates 2.2 times more consumer spending than an average remaster. We are talking about billions of dollars being funneled into recycled content. As the developmental budgets for original AAA games skyrocket, as the average release is anywhere from 80 to 300 million, publishers are terrified of risk. So much is seen with the recent layoffs across the industry for the past half decade. And because large AAA studios are treated as massive investment vehicles, they require monumental financial successes and actively avoid moderate returns. They are raiding their own back catalogs for a cost-effective safety net to keep investors from panicking and to keep development teams busy between massive projects, suffocating the market and starving games of funding. Note how it isn't small developers re-releasing content, but instead the big ones. And it doesn't look like it'll end here. As of recording, Assassin's Creed's Black Flag Resynced sold over 2 million copies on day one alone, despite the nearly $100 egregious DLC package the game offered. This dwarfs last year's Assassin's Creed Shadows, which only had 1 million players in the first 24 hours, which includes Ubisoft Plus subscribers and not actual sales. Something similar is seen in Persona 3 Reload, vastly outselling and trumping Shin Megami Tensei 5 in just 1 year of release and sales. The nostalgia apocalypse isn't anywhere close to going away. This leaves us with a final and definitive line in the sand. The solution to the remake epidemic isn't to stop modernizing old games entirely. It is to understand the crucial difference between preservation and revisionism. Remasters and remakes. Remasters are the true key to preserving gaming history. Look at the Kingdom Hearts HD collections, or the original Last of Us remastered for PlayStation 4. Kingdom Hearts, for example, took a brilliant and industry-defining game and optimized it for modern hardware architecture, lowering load times, making the game go faster, and even introducing new content. In Kingdom Hearts 2, for example, they introduced the Chamber of Memories. In Kingdom Hearts 1, they introduced new boss fights. They weren't simply remaking these games, they were remastering them and adding new content. A true passion project. The Last of Us Remastered on the PlayStation 4, for example, took a PS3 game which was beloved and smoothed out technological friction, updated the resolution, and stabilized the frame rates without overwriting the original artistic intent or changing the narrative framework. It was an original piece of art treated with respect. But when Sony decided to circle back and completely remake The Last of Us Part 1 on the PS5, and subsequently drop The Last of Us Part 2 remastered with native structural overhauls, which also took away the multiplayer mode that they were supposed to develop, a dangerous threshold was crossed. They didn't remake those games because the PS4 versions were unplayable or visually obsolete or inaccessible. They remade them to retroactively alter established character models and environment designs so they would perfectly mirror the live action HBO TV show. That's no longer preservation, it's corporate revisionism. It's the act of actively erasing and rewriting the past to serve the immediate marketing and multimedia ecosystem of the present. When a medium allows its history to be constantly painted over, altered, and sanitized for a predictable return on investment, it stops growing. We have to stop letting publishers sell us the hollowed out husks of our favorite memories. Or the 1983 gaming crash is coming for us. It's time to stop funding the Skinwalkers, demand true preservation, and force the industry to finally take a risk on something new, despite the starfields that release. Funding $70 remakes of Fire Red and Leaf Green is silly, but buying them for $20 a pop? That's a bit more desirable, in my opinion, and I'm not even a Nintendo fanboy. But what do you guys think? Are there modern remakes that you think actually got it right, or are you just as exhausted by this trend as I am? Please drop your thoughts in the comments below, I would love to read them. And if you enjoyed this deep dive and would like to see more videos from me, please be sure to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, anything. Your view alone is already a huge boon to my channel. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.